This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast and community for creative people who value and enjoy working alone. Here we are, another episode of Your Own Best Company. I'm Franklin Taggart, and my guest today is a very good friend of mine, Joanie Connell. And I've known Joanie for several years now, and we have been a part of a kind of an informal group of three that get together every week and kvetch and learn and complain and help each other, and God knows what else we do. But I have really come to respect Joanie a lot in the work that she does, and we're going to bring some of that to light today. She is an organizational organizational psychologist and organizational consultant, and she is also the author of Flying Without a Helicopter, and we're going to hear about a new book coming up, hopefully a little bit later. And I think I've gotten everything that I wanted to say about you, Joanie. Any important things that I've forgotten? Oh, we need to let people know about the name of your company.
My company is Flexible Work Solutions.
Yes, indeed. And flexibleworksolutions.com is where you can find everything that you ever wanted to know about Joanie and more. She's doing some amazing work, but one of the things that I wanted to bring to the program today was the whole topic of assessments and quizzes and just different ways that people learn about themselves and each other. Joanie is a specialist in that area and brings a lot of really great insight and information to us about that. Joanie, tell us a little bit about how you started to get introduced to the whole world of assessments and like type indicators and things of that nature.
It's kind of funny you asked that, because I was thinking that it wasn't my intention necessarily to do so.
Oh, okay.
I was in graduate school, and I guess I've always been interested in assessments and maybe in career development and all that. But when I was in graduate school, I ended up working with somebody in organizational psychology who is an expert in assessment and selection. Mm-hmm. And so we learned more than you would ever want to know about it. And it wasn't necessarily what my interest was going into grad school, and it wasn't necessarily where I wanted to focus coming out. But I got so much good training, I suppose, and knowledge and experience that I've been doing it ever since.
Very good. Well, my first introduction to it was probably the one that I'm most aware of is Myers-Briggs. Now, I grew up with a dad who was a guidance counselor. And what that meant was that every kind of scholastic test that came down the pike, we were his guinea pigs. So we took a lot of performance tests and scholastic tests and achievement tests and things like that as I was growing up. But the first time that I ever remember really looking into like personality and type and things like that was when I took the Myers-Briggs in college. And I'm an INFP. Introvert, intuitive, feeling, and perceiving. Not that that means anything. It's probably about as useful to me as anything else. But that was the first introduction that I had. And I remember just thinking, wow, isn't it interesting that they can really come that close with typing people? Because we all have this kind of maybe a need to be unique. And it turns out that we're kind of like quite a few other folks. But that was really my first introduction to it. And then, of course, that kind of followed the Keirsey type indicator, which was based on the Myers-Briggs and basically used the same letters. And those all kind of go back to Jungian psychology for their sources. But I'm kind of curious, tell me about the range. It seems like every day there's a new tool out. Tell me about the range of the tools that you use.
Oh my goodness, you're right. There are so many, and they're all for different purposes, I would say. Not all, but like you said, in different classifications. I mean, in the type of assessments, you're talking more individual, like about a person. We've also got team assessments, organizational assessments. You can do that. But you can look at people's behaviors. You can look at their attitudes, personality, abilities, interests. And that reminds me of, I think the first assessment I probably ever did take was the strong interest inventory for career assessment to learn about my interests. I think, you were asking about like the different types and what they're used for. There are a couple different things. I mean, one is to learn about yourself. And the other, when I talk about all my rigor in grad school, it's often to evaluate candidates for hiring and promoting and placing them in organizations. And that's a whole different set of assessment tools that require a different level of rigor because of the legalities and of hiring and all that, and making sure not to have adverse impact, meaning not treating different groups differently, things like that. But the different types of instruments that are out there, that range from just fun ones. I mean, I've done over the years now, like the Harry Potter placement, and which house you belong to ones that are more for team building, like the Myers-Briggs. That's really about how do you interact with others? How are you similar to or different from, and how can you maybe have some empathy for another person's perspective and way of being? To things that are more about who you are inside, things that you may not have really thought about before, to things, how good you are at things, the abilities test, right? Yeah. Do I have an aptitude for, the arts? Should I really go into this field? Or, then the interest is, do I have an interest in it? Which is a different story, right? You would like to have both, I would think, if you're going to go into a field. Those are the kinds of different things that people tend to assess. Yeah. And then, there's also feedback. Another one would be feedback, which is a good one. Like if you're at work and you want to understand from others how they perceive your behavior. I do a lot of 360-degree feedback assessments in the workplace. But you can either get some kind of assessment where you input the values so that you really are informing yourself about how you are, or others are inputting the values to give you some feedback, or you are trying to test to see how well you do at something.
Okay.
And that can also inform you, yeah.
You mentioned the Strongs, and I had forgotten that I had taken that, but I remember being kind of curious about the results that I got.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted it to tell me I needed to be a musician, but it told me I needed to be either a pastor or a bus driver.
Right.
So here I am.
That is so interesting, because it can be frustrating sometimes and you don't get the feedback you want. I mean, that might bring me to another kind of point here, is so the rigor of the assessment. I mean, no offense to the people who design these kind of little quizzes for the Harry Potter, but you can keep redoing the test to put in different answers to get into the house you want to be in. Yeah. And a test like that versus the inventory, the strong interest inventory, it's pretty solid. Yeah. I mean, you can fake it, and say who you're not, but what good is that? Right. But yeah.
I don't even think musician was an option on that one.
So like, if you want to be a musician, you shouldn't even be taking this test.
Just go out and do it, right? Well, what's really interesting to me is there's been an enduring kind of fascination that people have with the result that they get, and I've seen it used in ways that I kind of scratch my head about. Like, I remember when I first had Myers-Briggs information about myself and about other people, and I started to kind of pigeonhole myself in ways that I hadn't done before that. Like, oh, I'm an INFP, so that means that I should be behaving in certain ways. And you know, it also kind of, I used it as an excuse not to do things.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm an introvert. That means that I probably shouldn't go out, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was really interesting to see, like, I've seen other people use like the Myers-Briggs to tell people that they're not right for a job. And it was really actually quite painful and possibly very harmful to the person who was on the receiving end of that, to find out that their Myers-Briggs score was used as a reason to let them go from a job. And I don't think that that's the intent that was behind it when it was first made. And it's like, what are the ways that you see people using these kinds of assessments, both appropriately and inappropriately?
Oh, that's a really good example, Franklin, because yeah, I mean, something like the Myers-Briggs is not to be used for selection and doesn't have the reliability and validity to predict if somebody will be successful at a job. But it does have great utility in terms of interacting with people. And but you know, I think the point you're trying to make is that if somebody just hands you a test and tells you something and maybe gives you some information based on it, um, that maybe you're not taking it in the way that it's meant to be used. And so the Myers-Briggs is really meant to be used as a way to, as I said before, interact with people and understand that you might need to shift your way of communicating with others depending on what other people are looking for. And it's also, I mean, when you have these 4 boxes, you know, it can be a little bit maybe sort of black and white where there is more gradation there, like introversion, extroversion. Actually, if you look psychologically, is not a single dimension. You can have both. Okay. And so when you have your either I or E on the Myers-Briggs, it's not really an accurate assessment. It's one to help people communicate and understand each other better. But for example, I'm right in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm right in the middle of both. And so I can present as either. And it's confusing when you're sort of overlapping. You're on the fence. You don't really know. And it can be confusing to others too, because the one time they see you acting one way and they expect you to act a different way. But it's meant to just start the dialogue and talking about that, you know, not necessarily to use the results and stick to them. It's meant to say, okay, well, where do you fit on here? Oh, okay. Well, why? And how do you like to talk to people? How do you like people to approach you? You know, and when you're at work, you have a team member. Do you like the big picture? Are you a detailed person? Do you like to go out and do lunch all the time? Or would you rather stick to your office? And, you know, if you don't want to go out, then I'm not going to take it personally. You don't like me. I'm just realizing, oh, that's just kind of who you are, you know, but it's meant to initiate those kind of conversations, not prescribe people. And it's certainly not meant to make decisions on where people should work.
Yeah. Now, one of the instruments that you've introduced me to is the Strengths Finder. Mm-hmm. And I really got a lot out of that in terms of kind of understanding not only the primary strengths that I have, but some of the more subtle strengths that I have that I would have never even recognized within myself. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that tool and how it is applied and how it's brought, you know, what does that bring to light?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorites. That's actually my current favorite right now. And, you know, that it's actually not meant to be used for selection as well, meaning like hiring, placing people in teams. Although it has a lot of rigor behind it. The idea behind the strengths, it's called Strengths Finder, or more recently named to Clifton Strengths. Mm-hmm. It is all of the 34 strengths that are on this instrument here have been shown to predict performance at work. So no matter which strengths you have, those are the ones that are going to show that actually they do predict performance at work. It doesn't say which job they predict performance. It depends on how you use them. And everybody has a unique way of ordering, their strengths. And they talk about unique that I think you're 1 in 34 million people. Right. So it's not like, it's actually there since they're 34, you can do the math there and figure it all out. But it is, for all intents and purposes, unique. Right. I mean, I don't know if you run into 34 million people, you're a pretty well-connected person, but even that's a large number, right?
It's more than I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But some of the reasons I like it, and maybe that differentiate it from some other instruments. First of all, it was developed by some of the most famous people in the field of personnel psychology, right? They originally developed it as scientific methods, using those, it's reliable, valid, and it predicts performance at work. So that's why I use it, but also I love it because it's positive.
Yeah.
It's all about strengths. The idea isn't that we don't have any weaknesses. The idea is that it's much better return on investment, investing in your natural talents rather than spending so much more time trying to be good at things that you just don't have a natural ability at. We were joking about musicians earlier. It could be anything, right? But that's just one that people get. Like if you really don't have an aptitude, you can work really hard and get one, but that's going to be maybe more time than it's worth to you. You might be better at something else, maybe storytelling or, sports or, science or something like that. So go with where your strengths are. Let's see. Another reason is that it's very accessible to people. Like you said, you got it, you read it, you understood it, and it really brought some interesting information to you, that uncovered some subtleties that maybe you hadn't noticed before. And it's also inexpensive.
Yeah.
It's actually accessible to people because some of the instruments I use for, placement and stuff, I mean, they're hundreds and thousands of dollars, to do these things in the workplace. But ones that people just enjoy, this is reasonably priced for just any person to take. And it's fun to work with because people really learn a lot about themselves. And you asked originally in this whole podcast about why do people use assessments? And so much about it is learning about yourself.
Yeah.
And it's so empowering to learn something about yourself, a strength that you have that you didn't realize that you had, or a way to apply it in a way you didn't realize you could apply it. That is just a wonderful thing to be able to help people learn.
Very good. I think we've spoken before. One of the assessments that I've taken in the last couple of years that was really impactful for me was the Colby, where they talk about your modus operandi. And it's been kind of a hot topic in the entrepreneurial realm the last few years. Talk a little bit more about, like, what are your favorites? What are the ones that you turn to again and again and again? And where are they relevant? What do they point to?
The types of assessment instruments?
Yeah, just give me an idea of the ones that are in your toolbox that you just use all the time.
Strengths is definitely one of them, the Clifton Strengths.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. Yep. It depends on what I'm doing. I mean, career coaching, I definitely use the Strong Interest Inventory. It's actually surprisingly reliable, valid, and useful. It gives, because you think like anyone can say what they're interested in, but this is actually, it really can point you to some useful information. When I get into working with leaders at work, I do a lot of 360-degree feedback. And that's, I use a few different kinds of tools that are out there, SVI, there's an EQI, different ones, depending on what they want to focus on. But also you can just do interviews, sometimes I do that too. But that's just a way to convey feedback to people from others. And then when I do like personality, the Hogan suite of instruments is one of my favorites currently. But that's, like I was saying, it's a very rigorous set of instruments, and they're, a little more expensive, and usually, I use them at high level leaders and executives, because that helps also identify derailers, as you say, things that can, when a leader can really do some serious damage to an organization, because, they have a lot of power and influence, and they can make decisions that can maybe be too risky or self-centered, things like that. So those kind of things. And then, in terms of abilities, one of them that I do is an assessment center. And that is not a place, but more of a thing. Mm-hmm. And that's like a battery of assessments where you observe people doing simulations, business simulations, to see them in action, how they lead a meeting, how they present, how they make decisions, how they respond to crisis situations, as well as like paper and pencil, as you used to call them, but like, electronic tests, like the Hogan and others. But that would also include some measure of cognitive ability, typically, like how well people can solve problems, and emotional intelligence. That's another one that I do a lot of. And that one, I like the Mesquite. It's a Myers-Briggs-Caruso test, because that's an abilities-based test of emotional intelligence, but there are other ones that are self-report measures as well. And you can get 360-degree feedback, like the EQI is a 360-degree feedback typically of emotional intelligence. And the Hogans also have an emotional intelligence one too.
Very
so
good.
Those are my standbys.
It's a good handful.
Yeah.
Well, on the other hand, let's talk about what are some of the personality things that are floating around that should be taken with a grain of salt, if taken at all.
Oh boy. I hope I don't get into any trouble for saying some of these things.
I'm setting you up to get in trouble here.
I know.
But I'll be there with you.
Okay. All right. So, the thing to look out for, if you ever really want to learn about an assessment, is look at the reliability and the validity, right? So the reliability is one. That means if you take it multiple times, you get the same, typical profile, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't depend on your mood or, those kind of things. And, faking it, I mean, if you're taking it for yourself, that's probably not as much of an issue, right? If you're taking a personality, like for a job, you want to make sure that it's not easily fakeable or cheating on it, those kind of things. But some of the ones that are more just for fun that people enjoy would be like an Enneagram, for example. And it's interesting, and it sparks great conversation, like the Myers-Briggs. It does it, but for selection, that can be problematic because it doesn't have the science behind it and the testing rigor that would stand up in court.
Yeah.
So, and the reasons to look out for that would be, again, if there's bias in it, if people of different protected groups by the Civil Rights Act, or are treated differently or have different responses, that can get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And those kind of things. That's a good example. And I'm trying to think of others that I stay away from. Usually a lot of the pop ones that are out there, they're fun and they're informative, but if you want to do it for yourself and have interactions, but making hiring decisions is not okay.
Well, where would you put a Gryffindor or a Hufflepuff anyway?
I know. Well, I mean, I had a lot of fun, and that was like my daughter's the one who said that to me, right?
Yeah.
And then luckily I landed in the right house so that she would still speak to me.
Yeah, it's like the Sorting Hat.
Yeah.
What can I do? It was the Sorting Hat.
I mean, it was a lot of fun.
I'm not on the Quidditch team. Leave me alone.
Right. I mean, there's a good use for a lot of these assessments. And, if you want to talk about quizzes and all that too, I mean, just even the results aren't necessarily as important as the process of taking it and thinking about something that can help a person discover more about themselves or what they want.
Yeah.
Right. So that, to me, I think is also a very valid reason for taking one.
Well, that's a nice lead into the next area that I'd like to talk about, and that is there is such a huge craze on using quizzes now,
Mm-hmm.
in particular for businesses and things like that, as a way of, making a connection with potential customers or clients. And like even this week, Ryan Levesque is doing his big quiz funnel
Mm-hmm.
thing, and it's just like I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people are signed up for his thing right now, but there are a lot of folks who want to use quizzes to help bring people into their business or to bring them into their organization. And I'd be curious to hear, like you just said, if you can make the quiz something that just gives people an opportunity to think about themselves. How can people construct quizzes that will do that?
Oh, there are several different ways you could do that. Um, and I think that, let's see, they're sort of like open-ended questions where people can just sort of fill it in and then sort of get back what they put in the different categories to get them just sort of thinking about it. There's no right answer.
Yeah.
But there are also ones that can sort you, maybe not into the houses, but sort you into different directions, maybe. I was just thinking about it. For example, I want to paint the inside of my house and I'm trying to figure out what colors to put in and what to avoid. And I don't really know. I don't have an expertise in that area. So if I went on a site and they had a quiz like, what kind of ambiance or feeling do you want? Like
Mhm.
warm, cozy, or are you looking for fancy or, soothing or, whatever it is, fun, dynamic. And I could put in some of those answers and it would tell me these are the color schemes you should look at. I'd be very happy, to say, oh, okay. And I'm already going to buy the paint. So it's not like someone's dragging me in to do something I don't want to do.
Yeah.
They're help guiding me into a direction that I would like to take. So something like that, I think is a way if you can get those kind of answers and then categorize them. That's not necessarily a psychological quiz. I
Right.
mean, I focus more on psychology, but the other things that can help people, get thinking about themselves is asking the right questions, right?
Okay.
Right. So it doesn't matter as much what the answers are, but if someone leaves the quiz going, wow, I hadn't thought about that before, and they keep thinking about it, that's a way to get them really, deciding, maybe I should inquire more because here's somebody who knows what kind of questions to ask or what, to get me talking about. I need to know more. So, putting together some really snazzy results. I mean, maybe you don't need to spend as much time on that. It's more a matter of getting people to reflect. So the
Hmm.
discovery piece as well as the reflection piece, I think are good ones.
Do you have a way that you would arrive at good questions?
Oh yeah. Okay. So there are things to avoid, for
Okay.
example, in questions. I mean, um, asking too much in one question, too much information. We call this like an assessment in psychology as like double barrel questions, for example. Like, you know, uh, let's see, do you like to jog in the park or eat breakfast outside or it could be like, do you like to jog in the park and eat breakfast outside and have a glass of wine with dinner? Well, what happens if you just like one of those things? That's very confusing, or if you do just one, does that make a difference? I don't know. So those kind of things, when you're asking too much information, there are other ones where you're anchoring people in certain ways, right?
How does that show
So,
up?
oh, that might show up. Let's say if you're asking somebody, for example, how many cups of coffee a week do you drink, right? And if you
Yeah.
have something like 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 4, more than five, um, then you're sort of suggesting that it's probably not very good to drink much coffee, and people might be embarrassed to say that they drink more, so they might underreport, or it may not give you the information you need if everyone's checking of more than five. because they have one every day, it doesn't really give you any information, right? Because like, why did you ask the question if everyone's going to have the same answer? So those are, some things. So thinking carefully about making sure you're going to get a variety of responses to a question, that it is actually distinguishing among different options, would be one way to make sure that it's a good question, not one that's useless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other things there that would be, you would want to hear about.
Yeah, you probably.
I can go on and on and on. I know. So I have to stop myself and say, all right, I don't want to so, yeah.
Well, I think that's just a really good point, that thinking about the questions is really an important piece of this. I do feel like that, so many of the classes that I've seen and taken on developing quizzes put a lot on the results. They talk more about the results, and then the questions kind of lead toward a specific result or not. But it's interesting to hear you talk about the importance of the questions themselves and the process of thinking about the questions being an important consideration.
Yeah, right. I mean, the sort of garbage in, garbage out philosophy, right? If you don't have good questions, you're not going to get good results.
Yeah.
And that is actually the first step. And there's a lot of information out there on the internet on how to design questions. But I mean, if you wanted to get really serious, you'd want to, again, look at valid, reliable information on the internet about how to do this, right? And books on assessment that are out there. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we didn't mention in your intro is that you're also a podcast host for Reinventing Nerds. So one of the questions that I would have, and this is just a hypothetical, this isn't even close to reality, is like, if you were trying to screen guests for your podcast, what kind of a quiz would you put together to screen them?
That's a great question. Quiz, sort of an intake form versus a quiz. Let's see. A couple of things that come up for me on Reinventing Nerds is, first of all, are you actually a nerd, right? And that's like, how do you describe that, right? But essentially, the types of people that I typically have on there are leaders in STEM, for example, or other environments where people tend to be very technical. And so a quiz would be about, perhaps some of their, what they do, what their job is and what their experience is. But their personality might be part of it too, their interests and what they like to do. And also what they've learned. I mean, because for me on my podcast, I want to know that people actually have learned something, or how willing they are to talk about those kind of things and their struggles, because we usually try to get into some real conversations about challenges that people have had. So openness to talking and sharing.
How would you be able to tell if they were an interesting guest or not?
Well, it's a sort of a difference here between a quiz and an intake. An intake would be somewhat of an open-ended, like, tell me a little bit of your story or your paragraph, or a little bit about you. But in terms of a quiz, let's see, I would probably go to behaviors rather than personality, right? So behaviors and experiences, like what kinds of things have you done or experienced? And and then maybe the type of way they like to share information, their communication style would be a little bit too, because if somebody only likes written, they probably better be a better blog guest than a podcast guest, right? If they like to talk about it. And maybe some of the feedback that they've gotten from others, right? So sometimes people aren't always as aware of themselves, but if somebody else has been telling them, like, they have great conversation skills or something like that, then, what do your friends say about you, your significant others, people at work, those kinds of things would be an interesting kind of question too.
Would you ask questions like Star Wars, Star Trek, Dune, or?
Well, that's a great question, Franklin, because that assumes they are a nerd, right? And that could be one that if they didn't have, or like, to check in to see if, that they would understand that question would be a great way
Yeah.
of going. And that would to sort of be a litmus test, I guess you would say. But those are kind of questions that would be great to get information to be able to talk to them about too on the podcast, right?
Yeah.
You find out that they are more of a Star Wars fan, then you could bring in some interesting Star Wars factoids or references. I don't know.
Well, one of the things that we don't have time to do today, but I think would be fun to do at some point. I mean, I could take the Strengths Finder again, and I could actually, pay for the big results package so that I can understand it. But one of the things that we could possibly do is get back together again, and then we could go through my results with each other, and you could kind of help me understand and interpret what it all means. Would that be interesting to you?
Yeah, sure. That would be a lot of fun. That'd be great.
Well, let's figure it out. The last thing that I wanted to cover in our time today is you are a one-person business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested to hear a little bit about what drives you in that direction, and what are the things that you love about it, and what are the things that are difficult about it?
Okay, I'll tell you, it didn't start out as a one-person business. Flexible Work Solutions actually started out as a partnership. But then I guess in that regard, it was a matter of what made sense in the business to do in terms of expertise. And we ended up going different directions. And I've also had people on board who are other consultants and that kind of work that I do, similar kind of work, and found that I guess sort of the nature of flexible work solutions is we do a lot of different things. And over the years, it's better to have people who you can pull in for different types of projects rather than staying on board the full year round. And so I have partners, like strategic partners that I work with instead of trying to have employees. So that drove me to just say it's easier to be sort of a one-person business collaborating with others. And as I said before, I'm sort of on the fence of introvert extrovert. So on some of this, I love being alone. I love working and thinking and learning and creating, but I do get very lonely if I'm doing it all alone. So I may not be your ideal candidate for a one-person business in the, like saying, I love it. The way I make it work for me is to collaborate a lot.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things to do. I find people to work with on different projects. I get involved with different organizations where I can interact with others. And the nature of my work is very interactive too. I mean, I'm coaching and consulting, so I'm in meetings a lot with people.
Yeah.
So that's a way that I make it work for me, and I enjoy it. When I just finished a book, we were going to talk about that. That is a very isolating experience to be writing a book. And, I need to take breaks to do that, because otherwise I sort of pull my hair out. That's an example of something that's a little bit overdone. If it's too much, it's not comfortable.
Is it too soon to tell people about the book, or should we wait until it's a little closer to being published?
I can mention it. It just went to production just
Very
yesterday. Good. Yes, it's the American Psychological Association is publishing it, the APA, and it is called Consulting to Technical Leaders, Teams, and Organizations, it's building leadership in STEM environments. So it's part of the Consulting Psychology series for the APA, and it's coming out in January 2022. So it takes a long time to produce a book.
Well, it's very exciting, and I just couldn't be happier for you that you have the opportunity to do it. This has been a total blast. I've loved the conversation, and it has been really intriguing. And like I said, I think that there's probably more for us to talk about. So let's find another time and continue the conversation.
Absolutely. I can talk about the strengths all day long. So
Yeah.
I'll try to keep it brief, but we'll do it.
Well, knowing me, it's probably not going to be very long. But again, Joanie Connell, flexibleworksolutions.com is the website. And Reinventing Nerds is the podcast. I would encourage you to check out both of them. Anything else you want to let people know about before we finish up?
I think we've covered it. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
This has been a treat. Thank you, Joanie.
Thanks.
People who work alone aren't antisocial, at least not most of us. If people think you're weird because you don't want to grow a big company and you'd rather spend most of your time working by yourself, you're just hanging around the wrong people. Your Own Best Company has a Facebook group that you're invited to join right now. We understand the urge to close the door, let your imagination run wild, and stay there until your creative impulse runs its course. We also understand the features and challenges that go along with running a business to support our solo flight lifestyles. Joining the group is free, and it's as easy as clicking the link in the channel description. So go there now and just join the group. Want to hear more where this came from? Subscribe to Your Own Best Company on your favorite podcast app or on the Franklin Taggart Coaching and Consulting YouTube channel. To get in touch with Franklin, send an email to yobc@franklintaggart.com. Thanks for listening.